Excellent, guys. This is MS Office Hours on July 25th, 2019. And we have with us today Mr. Garrett Chandler, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the upcoming device-based subscriptions for education. You guys hopefully are all familiar with Office 365 Pro Plus and deploying it across your environments. In many cases, that's been somewhat challenging, specifically for labs and libraries in education. And so we've had some solutions in the past, which Garrett, I'm sure we'll talk about, but more importantly, we now have a new solution that is a fully supported from the product group solution. So with that, I will hand it over to Garrett Chandler, who is our technical specialist that has been supporting ProPlus deployment education since coming to Microsoft.
Awesome. Thanks, Preston. I appreciate you having me on today and so excited to talk to you all about device-based subscriptions for education. So as Preston mentioned, when we had Office 365, the new click-to-run version initially launched, we were also excited about it, but because it was based on a user license, in order to activate, that posed some problems for K-12 and higher ed institutions. As you're probably all familiar with, we announced, the education team came up with a solution called device-based activation, and that kind of solved some of the issues with the user activation. So we were able to actually take a device and create a user in Azure Active Directory based on the device name, and then trick the Office Pro Plus deployment to leverage the license applied to that user directly to the Office client. And it's been a great solution. It's working really well, but there are a couple of challenges with it, right? So Preston mentioned supportability being one of those key issues there that some customers face. If you have Premiere, you may not have been able to dial into Premiere and get support for device-based activation. But it was a great solution. It worked really well. In fact, it worked so well that the Office engineering group was able to build a new solution kind of on top of this device-based activation solution and build it directly into the product. So we are super excited to announce kind of this, what I'm calling the next evolution of DBA. And I'm going to kind of highlight some of the details today. I may not have all the answers to all of your questions just yet, as we have not released this just yet. It is coming soon. But I would love to get some feedback from you guys and answer what questions I can. So let me continue here. All right, so you're familiar with Office Pro Plus. You've probably been deploying it in your environment. If you haven't deployed Office 365 Pro Plus, now is the time to do so. We've got a lot of cool features designed specifically for education, including the accessibility tools, some really powerful tools to make presentations better within PowerPoint, really cool features within Excel like Data Streamer to help you analyze data, which is all designed around education. So now is the time to be deploying Office 365 Pro Plus, and we hope that this new solution can help you achieve that. One quick note that I want to mention that if you're not aware of, and I'm sure most of you are, is that Teams is now included in Office 365 Pro Plus. We're super excited to include that in the Pro Plus base installation. Of course, we can leverage our configuration.xml within the Office deployment tool to configure that if we do not want to include that. But it is now enabled by default, so I want to have that specific call out. All right, so this August, we are making it easier for you guys to deploy Office 365 Pro Plus in your environments with this new device-based subscription model. And what we can do is actually allow IT admins like yourselves to assign Office 365 Pro Plus to a device instead of a user. Okay, this should make it a lot easier to manage and deploy Office 365 on your lab and library devices. Typically, these scenarios where we have shared device use between students, right? Shared carts, and then labs and libraries, like I mentioned. So this will be a great solution, and I'm going to kind of highlight a couple of the technicalities of what's involved here. We call out right here that it is going to be available through the EES in mid-August. I will say really quick that that may be subject to change. We are hoping that mid-August is still there, but that's our plan. So if it's maybe end of August, don't be too alarmed there. But we are aiming for mid-August, so it should be soon. We had really hoped to get this out before back to school, but that's okay. Hopefully what we walk through is going to give you a little bit of an understanding of what you actually need to do to adopt this model, so you can start planning for it now. So I think it's still good. And this will be a no additional cost add-on for qualifying education customers, and we'll talk about what that means in a later slide. All right, so kind of highlighting the differences between user-based licensing and device-based licensing. Today, Office 365 ProPlus is leveraging a user-based licensing. We're not really talking about DBA at this point. We're just talking about the standard click-to-run installation. And when we first install Office 365 ProPlus and we launch it, it does prompt for a sign-in. Right, and that's where that sign-in for the end user will sign in. It'll take one of the 5 licenses that we are given from the Office 365 portal, and then apply it to that device that they've signed into. So the license is applied to the user. It does require that user level activation, and the user uses their Azure AD ID, right? So their Office 365 credentials. What's different about device-based licensing is that the license is actually going to be applied to the device. So it will not require user level activation, meaning that no one has to sign in upon launch of any of the Office products once installed. And then it does not require the user to have an Azure AD ID. Really, it boils down to the difference is the licensing model, not the experience. Specific call out here is that the Office client apps are available via the device-based licenses, just like you're used to today. However, if we apply a device-based license to a device for Office to take, we still need to license the end users who are actually going to be interacting with Office. Okay, so the client apps themselves will be licensed with the devices, but if a user signs in to Word, for example, if they want to leverage OneDrive or Exchange Online, SharePoint services, and cloud data storage, they're still going to need that user license. So if you've got A3 or A5, you would still need to license your users for those products. On this slide, this is going to kind of highlight the different experiences that we have when we sign in the various scenarios. So the first one here is DBS, that's device-based subscription, with a sign-in by the user who has a ProPlus license. When I play this video here, you'll notice that we're going to sign directly into Windows. And as soon as we sign in, the app is going to be auto signed in with the same credentials, right? So we can go into Word, we'll launch it, that single sign-on experience occurs where we are going to be signed into Word as the person who logged in. Initially, and this is right now, Word is licensed with a user's ProPlus license. And you can highlight, you can see that it's actually been licensed by the user, okay? And in just a moment, in this demo here, they're going to enable a registry key. And this registry key is a new registry key. And we'll talk about some of the technicalities there. They're going to add this registry key. It's called DBS Enable. They're going to set it to 1. We're going to go ahead and add that reg key to Windows. We're going to go back and we're going to launch Word. And if we go back into the About configuration page, we will actually see that the Word is now actually licensed as the device. They just highlighted that the user is still logged in, so the single sign-on experience is still there, and Word is still connected into the cloud service, so they still have access to all of their OneDrive data storage and their SharePoint sites. So that is a good example of DBS with a ProPlus license applied. Gonna go ahead and pause that. The second scenario is if we have a DBS sign in by a user with an Office A1 license. Okay, so we're going to sign in as a user who just has the A1 license, only the Office Online access. We're going to go ahead and play this video here. They're going to go ahead and sign in to Windows.
So it's an example of like a light worker logging into a library workstation.
You got it.
Or something. Yeah.
You got it. Perfect. Yep. So the app is auto signed in with the same credentials here as soon as they launch Word. But Word is licensed with DBS automatically. But Word is still connected to the user's cloud service. The user can save his documents to OneDrive and the SharePoint site. Okay. And then the final scenario here is if we have a DBS sign-in with a user who does not have a license applied to their account at all. This is typical with like local user accounts directly on Windows. They don't even have a cloud identity at all. We'll sign into Windows with the local account. However, when we launch Word, no one is signed in because there is no cloud identity associated with that user. But the user can still access Word, right? Still full functionality, but they can only save to the local drive. They can't save into anything cloud. So that is the basic experience of DBS altogether.
And so that last one would be like a guest on your network, or I used to give the example of maybe like GED students who aren't in your Active Directory or Azure AD at all. They would not have a cloud identity, and thus would be like your last example, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and you know what? We often see these scenarios for kiosk devices that are set up, or even in certain times of the year, right, with parent registration and things like that. They may need to go in there and type something up, print it out real quick, so they still have that full functionality within Office.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to progress to the slides here. This is kind of highlighting some of the logistics of DBS altogether. In order to get the Office 365 ProPlus device-based subscription SKU, you will be able to go into your Office 365 admin portal and add that at no cost. And we are highlighting here, we've got to turn on that DBS mode by applying that reg key. One thing that I want to call out right now is that in order for Office 365 ProPlus with device-based subscription, in order for the devices to actually get the license, right, we've got to get that SKU into our portal. So we're going to go in, we're going to add that SKU to our portal. But then what we're going to do is we're going to create a new device group, a group that has devices in it, and we're going to add those manually, or using a PowerShell script to automate it. We can use group-based licensing then to apply that new licensing SKU to that group that we created. Okay, so all the devices that are going to have Office 365 ProPlus, leveraging the new device-based subscription, all of those device identities need to live in Azure AD. And there needs to be a group that contains all of those devices. So how do we get the devices into Azure AD? Well, we either need to enroll the devices directly into Azure AD, or we need to set up hybrid Azure AD and sync those devices with Azure AD Connect. So please note that in order to get those device identities synced up into Azure AD, we've got to configure some of that first. Once we get that group configured and those devices are living in that group, we can apply that device-based licensing to that group, and automatically, as long as that reg key exists on those devices, the device-based subscription will take precedence over the activation of the current installation of Office, right? So if there's a user in there and we enable that reg key and it lives within that group in Azure AD, DBS is going to take over. With that being said, we do need to have Azure AD Connect up and running, right? So that's a prereq, and at least configure hybrid Azure AD if you have devices that are still joined to the domain. From a qualification perspective, from licensing, device-based subscriptions for education will be available as a benefit for every customer who covers all knowledge workers or education qualified users with an Office 365 Pro Plus, an Office 365 A3 or A5, or a Microsoft 365 A3, A5 license. Okay. Qualified customers are entitled to as many DBS licenses as the total number of Office 365 Pro Plus, Office 365 A3, A5, or Microsoft 365 A3, A5 faculty and student licenses. So however many student and faculty licenses you have, that is how many DBS licenses that you have. So in most scenarios, that should cover the majority of your computers that you're going to license, or those Office installs that you're going to license with DBS. A couple of other requirements for DBS is that it will require Windows 10, 1803 and up, and it will require Office 365 Pro Plus build version 1906 and above. Okay, so I mentioned a couple things about the reg key being applied. I was talking to the product group a little bit earlier today and got confirmation that we will be able to set that reg key directly with the configuration.xml that we are familiar with deploying with the ODT. So that will be exposed in the UI soon. It may not be available immediately upon the release of DBS, but we will highlight all of that information when we fully announce this. And then we will also support this from both a group policy perspective and an MDM policy perspective. So you'll be able to set that registry key before deployment with updated ADMX templates. And then if you're using Intune to manage any of your devices or a third-party MDM tool to manage those Windows devices, we will be able to set that with a CSP. There will be a blog coming very, very soon that will announce all of the DBS features and how to get started. Okay, they're also creating a admin deployment guide. So as soon as we announce this, it shouldn't be very long before we have that full-fledged admin deployment guide ready for you guys as a step-by-step to get it going in your environment. So be looking for that. This slide here is just some basic FAQ. I've pretty much covered all of this. The one thing that I wanted to highlight specifically was that this last question on the first column here, will users have to use one of their 5 downloads that we give them with the Office 365 licensing? No. Users of Office 365 or Microsoft 365 will not have to use one of those 5 downloads. So we will still we'll retain those licenses for that user. I was talking with engineering a little bit earlier too in the cases of a migration. So let's say we had an Office activation occurred by the user and then we transition it to DBS. Right now that license is still, or that device is still assigned to that user. So they'll need to go and delete that out of their portal later, but they will have the ability to do so. And then that does not affect the Office install once they do so. But just note that if it has been preemptively activated as the user, then they can go and remove that later once DBS is enabled. Again, this is not necessarily the same scenario as shared computer activation or device-based activation. I think there's a lot of questions right now along the lines of, will DBA continue to be supported? What's the time frame that we need to make this transition? There's still some questions on our side as well, but I would be looking at moving to this model ASAP just as soon as you can. It's going to be a little bit more supported. We can remove things out of the equation like the OPP transition.exe. We can remove the bloat of some of the user accounts in your Azure AD. So it's all good. But I wanted to make that specific call out on that. We're still kind of figuring out what the timeline is for DBA, but we will be sure to share that information with you guys when we have a little more clarity around that. So Preston, with that, that's what I've got.
Awesome,
so
man.
Open it for questions.
Yeah, we got a couple of questions and then some other points that I just want to help clarify a little bit. So first question that we have, or last question that we have, that came up was from Mark about Office 365 Pro Plus for Mac. Does it support this new DBS? I honestly don't know the answer to that one.
It's not going to immediately. I think there are plans to incorporate that. We've heard the request a lot for DBA, but I can absolutely follow up on that ask and get back to you.
Right, awesome. And to Marge's question here, does DBS play well with Intune? Did you answer that one?
Absolutely. In fact, we are going to have the CSPs to deploy this directly within the ODT, leveraging the config.xml. So if you've deployed Office today within Intune, you're familiar with probably configuring all the settings that you need to deploy Office. It will be exposed at a later time in the UI directly from Intune. And because the devices that are in Intune already live in Azure AD, it's going to be a great experience.
Yeah, so the point there is this is just standard Office 365 Pro Plus deployment, right? And then DBS is essentially a setting to say, look for the license up here and pull from one of these group licenses, right?
You got it. It's honestly not that different from shared computer activation. If you've messed around with that at all, that's typically what we recommend for like VDI solutions and things like that. That's simply a registry key in the Hive that Office is installed in. DBS is going to be very similar behavior.
Right. We just essentially require these licenses, which again won't be available until August 15th. And that is one way that we can help prevent fraud and abuse, which is something that got a little bit out of control with the sort of unlimited Pro Plus licenses. The
Office 365 A1 Plus for students, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Where does Vizio fall into this process? I'll answer that one. It doesn't. Vizio is completely independent from Office 365 Pro Plus. It's not a part of that suite. Thus, is completely separate licenses. So Scott Swartz asks, so the device needs what? Go ahead. Sorry.
Will there be a device-based Visio license?
No.
Not to my knowledge.
So I say no out of hand, just, or whatever, very glibly, but things change. I never know where we'll actually go as a company. That is not the intent today. Today, we are specifically trying to solve the problem for Office 365 Pro Plus as it relates to library and lab machines. Now,
yeah, no, I get that. I mean, but that is kind of an issue too, because a lot of people are still sitting on 2016 because they have Vizio deployed in some of their labs.
Right. And so what I was going to say is if you guys want to advocate for that, I would highly recommend, again, going to user voice and finding if there is already a topic up there or creating one and then sharing it with this community. And, always sharing your story of why, how many of these would you need, that type of stuff, so that Vizio engineering team is aware of the fact that they too are facing the same problem as Pro Plus. We can certainly help escalate that if you can sort of start that conversation. Okay. So so how do we handle Vizio in a lab environment? You, I guess, stay with 2016 or buy enough licenses for Vizio to cover everyone. So Vizio doesn't have a student use benefit is the big situation, right? It is when you buy Vizio as a click to run installation, it is a subscription and it is a per user subscription. So it's not an unlimited for students type of thing. And so that's why you would need to purchase those licenses and then assign them to each of the users. The recommended approach there is to use group-based licensing for your students. And if you've got 50 students in the classroom that need to use that lab to use Vizio, then you would need to put them all in a group and assign Vizio to that group. Hopefully that answers that question. I mean, I'm not trying to skip off of that one. So it just isn't like Office 365 Pro Plus, where it's sort of, for lack of a better term, it's not unlimited, but covered as a part of the Office 365 or Microsoft 365 A3 and A5 licenses.
Preston, can you give us some idea why that is? Is there something as part of Visio and perhaps Project that's licensed outside of Microsoft?
Yeah, I mean, they're just different product groups. They're not a part of that suite. They just simply Office Suite itself is a standard set of applications that are utilized by the majority of industry throughout the world. Visio and Project aren't as commonplace, at least historically. They've primarily been utilized by a subset of users. Thus, we don't just deploy, we don't just wrap them in. That would drive the cost of Office up higher. So in order to keep that cost at a more manageable pace, those are independent components that you buy separately, not part of that bundle.
Yeah, they're not used as broadly because students don't get access to them because we've got to license them separately. It just seems that you're running the Office suite by not allowing these diagramming and, for that matter, project management products to be used in education so that they follow on to industry. But
no, I think you have a good point. Yeah, not disagreeing with you. And by the way, understand that the project product team reached out to me just quite literally 2 weeks ago and talked to me about this specific topic of how is project being used in education and some of that type of stuff. And so I'm having them put together a little, hopefully anyway, getting them to put together a survey that I'll bring to you all to allow you to give feedback directly to that product group. And perhaps I can reach out to the Visio PG and get something very similar from them as well, just so that they can be aware. What I think you guys are coming across and what we're starting to see in Microsoft field is that the use of Project and Visio is certainly increasing in the education setting, which means more and more people are utilizing it in, I guess I should say, more standard usage rather than it being a specialized tool. And I think that's just some information we need to help bubble up a little bit further. So I do appreciate the feedback, and I will continue to try to get that to the product groups. So I think another question is, so the device needs to be hybrid joined, but do they need to be Intune managed? I assume, Garrett, the answer there is they need to be joined to Azure AD or hybrid joined, but they do not have to be Intune managed, correct, sir?
That is correct.
Okay. So the reason why they have to be Intune joined or hybrid joined in some fashion, they have to be joined to Azure AD, is because the device object has to exist in Azure AD in order for it to have a license associated to it, basically. Does that seem like an accurate description? Garrett's on mute again, but hopefully that was accurate. It made sense to me when I said it.
Yes, sorry, that's accurate.
That's okay. Greg had a question of where does this leave DBA? Do you want to address that, Garrett?
Yeah, for right now, DBA will still be in place. It'll still be active. And we have no foreseeable timeline that we're going to stop supporting DBA. But I would encourage you to look at DBS and try to get up and running with it as soon as possible, because it is our goal to move away from DBA and have DBA or DBS effectively replace DBA. And that's really to your benefit. So no specific timeline that we can share right now, but I would jump on this as soon as you can.
Yeah, so I think the point there is we are aware of the fact that this is not, the license itself isn't even becoming available until the middle of August, and that is not a time frame that fits with, quote, summer deployments. We fully understand that, but as this rolls out and becomes available, we certainly encourage you to start testing and determine, is this something that you can pivot to? As you think about it, it would not require a reinstallation of Office ProPlus to move to DBA, because again, it's just sort of the licensing and the registry setting. So we certainly can have more in-depth conversations about that as we get to, once this actually launches and comes out. But we do feel good about you being able to move to this from your existing Office 365 ProPlus deployments mid-year. Is that a fair statement, Garrett?
Yeah, and to add on just a little bit, we also understand that some of these prereqs, like having the devices synced up into Azure AD, that may take some change management on your side, some planning on your side. So we definitely don't want to leave you high and dry, right? We're going to make sure that the majority of our customers are up and functioning with DBS, and it's a good solution before we do anything rash. So it's just something to start planning for and thinking about now. We'll take care of you, I promise.
Yeah, and we'll certainly work through it on this community call and continue to help you guys as you have questions, or we work through that once it comes out. So to just sort of summarize, I think in general, the thing to take away from this is you can't even order the licenses or get started until after August 15th. So this is really just us giving you a heads up of this is coming. I think the other thing is to understand that this is not going to break your existing ProPlus deployments, whether you use the DBA as part of that deployment process or not. Even if you acquire the licenses, it won't just break your existing deployment in any way. There is a process by which you can transition from your current DBA deployments to DBS. I think the other thing is we have, as Garrett showed you, it is a very good user experience, regardless of whether this is a knowledge worker, a light worker, or a kiosk worker, or some kind of a general guest account of some sort. So I feel like this is a really good solution for libraries and labs. And I think finally, the last thing I would say is, I think the general intention here is much like shared computer activation, that you wouldn't necessarily push DBS to all of your computers, right? For those that are one-to-one, like say the finance department, or maybe even if you have one-to-one students, there would be no need necessarily to set DBS on that device, but rather this would be for those devices where there is a potential for those shared use situations. Anything else you want to add, Garrett?
No, but in fact, in the spirit of a community call, it looks like Pat Bowles, who is one of our private previewers of DBS, was actually asking if they could share a little bit about their experience so far.
Man, that'd be great.
Pat, can you just share briefly what your experience has been so far?
Yeah, so we actually kicked off, I think it was the first or second week of June. We already had devices already hybrid managed because we are doing the co-management with SCCM in Intune, but definitely there is not a requirement for it to have Intune. Pretty quick, pretty easy. I know at least, right now we had to do a couple of things before the preview actually gets going and things like that, but really quick and easy. It was registry change. The devices would go out during their initial login to the Office products. Had a little bit of a hiccup a couple of times that they'd have to shut down Office and reopen it. But I think the process really, for those that are concerned about it, definitely a lot easier than the shared device activations. And I'm really excited to see some of the reporting starting to come along the lines to be a little bit more proactive as to what devices are having problems with licensing and so on and so forth. So we've got, I think, about 400 or so devices that are already currently using it. And it really has been pretty dang smooth.
That's great, Pat. Thanks so much for sharing.
Yeah, that is fantastic. So quick question from David Nelson. Is there any disadvantage to using DBS on all machines? I don't know what the disadvantage would be, but I'm not certain I know what the advantage would be either.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it kind of comes down to what licenses you have available, right? If you happen to have more shared devices than you do one-to-one, that may be a case. But if you have all one-to-one, device-based subscription may not be the best fit. I think it's going to come down to your specific environment, what makes sense for you. But I don't think there's an advantage or disadvantage.
Right. I think some of the areas where we don't necessarily think about that aren't library or lab scenarios where DBS might be beneficial is if you have a teacher device that is assigned to a room, and you're going to have a substitute teacher come in, and they may need to open and edit to, say, a Word document or something while they're in there. That that may be an example where DBS would be able to solve for that scenario. But everybody's going to have individual scenarios, and I don't think there's a disadvantage or an advantage. It's going to be you choosing which way works best for you and your environment. Okay.
And the cool part is that you do have that flexibility, right? You can always remove that license or remove that registry key and then add as you need. So you've got flexibility to modify. Just as school districts, the nature of school districts are, we have to be on top of our game all the time. So being able to have that flexibility to move around, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, so it's you don't have to redeploy if you change your mind about certain devices, right? Yeah, you just flip that switch and it changes it. So excellent. Well, I'm going to stop the recording at this time. Thank you, Garrett.
Preston, one other quick question. When we're talking about the number of licenses equaling the faculty license and student license, since student's license is on a percentage of a one base, so many students per active faculty staff licenses, and then we're multiplying again for labs? Just want to clarify on that.
Let me make sure I have this, because I believe I have the right answer, and I'll let Garrett correct me where I may be wrong. But you have, and Marge kind of asked this question before, so I want to make sure I clarify. You have X number of EQU, or educationally qualified users, what we used to call knowledge workers, right, that you've licensed for. You can have up to 40 times that number of no additional cost student use benefit licenses, right? And that, the culmination of those two, if I add those two numbers together, that's how many, the maximum number of device based subscription licenses I could acquire. So let me clarify. If I had 1,000 faculty staff, I could order up to 40,000 student use benefit licenses at no additional cost to me. Now, if I chose to only order, say, 5,000 student licenses, I would have a total of just 6,000 in my tenant, and that would be the limit on the device activation or the device-based subscription licenses as well. So you can have a maximum of up to 40x of on the Microsoft 365 A3 and A5 licenses for student use. Did I clarify that or make it more confusing, Brian?
So what's the total number of device-based licensing? That'll answer it.
The total number of device-based licensing is your number of faculty licenses plus your number of student licenses. Period.
Okay, so if we got 10,000 faculty and we've ordered 40,000 student licenses that are covered under that percentage, and it's 50,000 devices.
That you can order, right? You still have to order those licenses, but yes.
Okay, and that would be the other part, is how is that going to work? Since it's a device-based licensing, I'm assuming we're going to have to go through.
I'm pretty sure it's going to be a SKU.
Or is it just going to automatically show up?
It's not going to automatically show up, to my knowledge. It looks like it's on our price list as a separate SKU. So you'll place a $0 order. You can do that midterm. You do not have to wait for your anniversary renewal or anything. So as soon as it becomes available, you can order your maximum number if you want. And then that'll process through your reseller and ultimately show up into your tenant as it's associated to that agreement.
All right, thanks.
Yep. All right. With that, now I'm going to
Preston,
stop the recording. I'll keep it going. Go ahead.
Well, you mentioned that the student factor was 40-1 for every A3 or A5 license. I thought for A5 it was a 15-1.
Nope. So let me clarify that. It's a great question. I do appreciate it. It's so for discrete licenses that you would purchase, let's say you bought Office 365 ATP as a standalone license, then that is going to be available. Your student use benefits are going to be available at a 15-to-1 ratio. If you buy the actual suite, the either Office 365 A3 or A5, the EMS A3 or A5, or the Microsoft 365 A3 or A5, when you buy those, any one of those 6 suites, they come in at a 40-to-1 ratio. Or let me be clear. you have the ability to order up to a 40-to-1 ratio on the student use benefits. That doesn't mean you necessarily ordered 40 times of those. That's the maximum that you can order at no additional cost. And you can order additional licenses or buy more licenses. It's just how you do that, right? You actually transact more of the faculty licenses to get more of those student licenses.
Yeah, you actually said something in that reply that interests me. You mentioned ATP specifically, and it seems like last week on the call, I think John Cutler, and he may still be on the call, had asked about that, about whether student licenses inherited that ATP license. And I thought the answer last week was no, so that kind of put some problems in our plans, and we've engaged our account manager to look into that. We were looking at getting rid of Symantec endpoint protection and some other things, and clearly we need to cover students with that same protection on their use devices. So you're saying students are covered for advanced threat protection?
No, I'm saying our marketing team just confused the living daylights out of you. And on their behalf, I apologize. We have 3 different ATP products. There's Office 365 ATP, there's Azure ATP, and there's Defender ATP, Microsoft Defender ATP. So Office 365 ATP has a Plan 1 and Plan 2. They both have student use benefits per the slide that I showed earlier. The Azure ATP also has student use benefits. But Defender ATP, which is the one that you were just referencing as you compared it to competitive products for endpoint protection, does not have student use benefits. Now, you can purchase student licenses, they just simply aren't included at no cost. Did that clarify or convolute?
I think it clarifies it. We just need to look at the features of those and what our intent is. I don't know if John's still on or if we want to take that any further, but yeah, that clarifies it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And to Dale's question, how do we go about getting a small number of licenses for a test tenant? You would have to purchase M365 A3 or A5, right? Or one of the SKUs that were on Garrett's slide there to go in, and you could get the student use benefits in addition in that secondary tenant if you wanted, and then you could acquire these. In all reality, this is not something though that you would typically deploy into a necessarily a test environment unless you're running ITIL and you would typically already have the same premium, some handful of the premium SKUs setting in that staging tenant that would match your production tenant. So hopefully that answers your question. That's what you would need to do. You have to have those premium licenses in there, and then you can order the device license accordingly after August 15th. All right, I am going to stop the recording. We can keep going with Q&A. I'm just going to go ahead and stop the recording.